Hi, Janice here, Caribbean Garden Life, and in Antigua, or the Caribbean as a whole, we literally have two seasons, hot or hotter, or dry and wet. And as we're in the middle of the hurricane season, that also signals a transition to the cooler weather. So I'm going to share with you everything I have learned from my first proper season of gardening. Now, some of this may seem obvious, but it's not till you're actually in the thick of it that you really realise how sensible it is. So my first tip, the first thing I want to share is grow what you like to eat. It can be so easy to get caught up in trying to grow different things and, just trying your hand. And that's fine, you can experiment. But if you're not eating it, why are you going to put all that effort into planting something you're not going to eat? So for me, our garden is full of tomatoes, it's full of peppers, okra, lemongrass, herbs, sweet potatoes, and lots of other herbs and things that we like to eat. So my first tip there is grow what you eat. And adding to that, I talked about seasonality, and it's learning about the seasonality because yes, we live in a country where it's always sunny or it's always got a lot of heat, but not everything likes the heat. So I'm really looking forward to the cooler months now where I can start growing maybe some broccoli, some brassicas, cabbage, kale that are much more suited to the cooler, albeit cooler, say that in air quotes, cooler weather. My third tip is if you see a problem, deal with it straight away. Every morning, my morning ritual is coming to my happy place, the garden, and walk the garden, hand water the plants as much as possible if we haven't had any rain the night before, and check to see what's on the plants, see if I have any disease, any insects, any bugs just affecting the plants. And for me, squashes, any type of squash, cucumber, melons, what else? Butternut squash, pumpkins, zucchinis, crookneck squash. All of those for me are my nemesis, my arch nemesis, and I find them really problematic. And you usually find bugs, I don't know what the bugs are actually, I need to check that up, but you usually find the bugs are on them. And you may walk away and say, I'll deal with that tomorrow, I'll deal with that later. Don't. Deal with it straight away, because that little tiny caterpillar that I often see on a green zucchini, that can actually decimate your crop really quickly. So learn to deal with it pretty quickly. Squish them between your fingers, take off the leaf, look for the eggs, search, look. Do not ignore the problem and deal with it before it becomes a much bigger problem. And adding on to that, the pests. Overcome the squeamishness. You really get over your squeamishness. Here in the garden we have lots of lizards, we have giant African snails, which is the bane of my life, but you have to make sure you pick them up because they will absolutely decimate your crop. So you learn to look for white flies, you learn to look for the very different bugs, caterpillars on your plants. So overcome your squeamishness. They're not going to hurt you, but they are going to hurt your crop, and they are going to take away the food that you have worked so hard to grow. And when you've tried so hard to get rid of the bugs, and quite often everybody wants to go organic, everybody wants to make sure everything's pesticide free, that's fine. And as much as you can possibly go organic, I definitely try. I use neem, I use hand picking, as I said, for bugs. But don't be afraid or ashamed if you have to use a little insecticide or something like that to get rid of a real key issue. Don't be ashamed about it. Do what you have to do. For me, it's me or them, or it's my group, it's my food or them. So as much as I try my utmost to not use it, occasionally infestation gets so big that I have to try a little something. And that's what's really happened this morning with my squashes, that I did the cardinal sin. I ignored the bug. No, I didn't ignore it. I took some off, but I wasn't as diligent as I thought I was. And I come back and see the zucchini that was looking so healthy yesterday, full of holes and more caterpillars that I thought I'd taken off the day before. So I've given a little spray of insecticide, a light spray of insecticide, just to help it get over that infestation. Next, I'd say know your garden, know which direction the wind is coming from. When I created this garden, I wasn't that diligent. I just wanted a space that allowed me a couple of years ago to actually grow where the dogs didn't go, so they didn't upset the plants. And what I didn't realise is actually the windiest part, probably the windiest part of the garden. So knowing what I know now, I would have planted the other side of the garden. But that said, know your garden, know the soil. We have a combination of in-ground plant boxes and grow bags to help us produce the food we need to do. Not everything go in the ground, because for me, I'm kind of future-proofing as I get a bit older, and just help me get around, and I can move the grow bags to the various sunny or shadier parts of the garden, depending on the time of year and what's needed. So really know your garden. And that said, talking about the wind, it's not just the sun that dries out your plants, it's actually the wind that erodes the soil, that takes away, that dehydrates the soil. So for me, every morning I water pretty much. I check to make sure it's not too wet, I'm not going to oversaturate the plants, but invariably throughout the day, the sun has really dehydrated the plants. So I water every morning, and as I said, that's when I do my morning checks, check the healthiness of the plants, check for the bugs, and make sure that nothing is untoward with my babies. And if I do find anything untoward, or if it's got to a point where they're not growing really well, don't get overly attached to the plants, because you can spend a lot of time nursing what you think is you're going to nurse it back to health. But invariably, out of all your seedlings, out of all your plants, something may be a casualty. Something may just not grow at the rate it's supposed to be. Something just wasn't meant to be. So don't spend a lot of time trying to nurse it back to health. If it has to go, it has to go. Put it in the compost if it's not diseased, and don't get too attached to it. Talking of compost is free dirt, and it costs nothing apart from having a pile or a tub to put your old plants, your grass cuttings, your vegetable peelings from the house. We use a lot of compost, depending on the garden gets bigger, and compost is so full of nutrition and it's so easy to make. I have two piles. I have a big pile where from the trees and the branches are going to take a lot longer, and I also have a compost bin which I turn, and when the season starts again, I really look forward to that rich, dark, nutritious goodness to use on the garden. So definitely compost. It's amazing how much you get out of the house, or your household waste that you use in the kitchen waste that goes in the compost. So all my peelings, eggshells that obviously when I've treated them and put in the oven for a little bit to make sure we get no salmonella, coffee grinds and the like. So make sure you compost, because it's really, really good for your garden. Composting is just one of the ways I upcycle, but I remember I talked about having garden beds and raised beds. I use everything for raised beds. That's from breeze blocks or building blocks. I've even got a bed made out of the trunk or the limbs of a felled mango tree. So wherever I can, I look to recycle containers. I use my neighbour gave me 5-gallon water bottles, or the 1-gallon water bottle bottoms, which I use for seedlings, for young seedlings. So I recycle as much as I possibly can in the garden as well. So, and that helps the environment in longer term. And it's also cheap on your pocket, because you don't find yourself having to go and buy lots of containers or pots and things for your plants. So wherever you can, recycle, upcycle, whatever you want to call it, because it's good for your garden and it's good for the environment. Now, talking of upcycling, when you really get into it, sometimes gardening, because you want to do everything right, can actually can get quite expensive. But the one thing that doesn't have to cost you money is seeds. And I save seeds from everything. If I tell you how many tomatoes I've grown from maybe a shop-bought tomato, I save the seeds out of the peppers I've already grown. So I have a constant supply of fresh seeds, okra seeds. All that, again, is upcycling and recycling. So it doesn't have to cost you a fortune to plant your garden. When you're looking at your tomatoes, you'll get suckers in between. You can trim those in between and they grow another tomato. So nature is a wonderful thing and very, very self-sufficient, because let's face it, nature doesn't go to the box store or to the garden centre to buy seeds. It reseeds itself. So look at ways you can save seeds. There's loads of videos online, YouTube, that you look at to see booklet that tells you how to save seeds. So we have mango trees, we have pigeon pea trees, we have tomato plants, we have okra, we have peppers, all from seeds that we've saved from cooking or from friends. We've also done seed swaps. So again, if someone's growing something that you like or you haven't tried before, ask for a couple of seeds or maybe a cutting to try it yourself. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money to feed yourself. It's just a bit of diligence and time. The other thing I learned is clothing. I know it sounds silly, and yes, you're going to get dirty, playing in dirt, you're going to get mucky, so you have old t-shirts and stuff like that. But what I didn't realise is that things like bananas or coconuts, how much they can stain your clothing. So I always have a stash of very old t-shirts, very old shorts, clothes. I don't mind getting dirty or stained or anything in the garden. But the other thing I really won't compromise on is my footwear. And as I've gone through the season and been gardening, I wanted to make sure, yes, I was comfortable in my feet because I'm digging, I may be using some tools, but I also wanted to be comfortable in my footwear. So I have my personal recommendation that I've discovered quite recently is a footwear called sloggers, which are literally just, the best way to describe them is Wellington boots or half-cut Wellington boots, or just shoes that are like Wellington, that are made of Wellington boots. Really sturdy, waterproof, great for the garden, and I love them. I've fallen in love with sloggers. So footwear, clothing, and even if you haven't, make sure it's an old pair of trainers or runners you want to use, because that's what I first started using in the garden. But you don't mind getting them muddy, dirty, that you can clean off or you can use wherever you are in the garden. And I suppose one of the last points I want to make is that don't be afraid to make mistakes. The wonderful thing about I've found with gardening and growing the vegetables is experimentation, is learning from my mistakes, is observing what went wrong or what I did to rectify something. I actually keep a bit of Anarakish. I keep a log, and it's just an Excel log now that literally has everything that I want. It's my planting schedule, the seeds I have. It's grown over the season as I've got more into this, but I keep a log of what I've got to do or what I've done, what I've planted, what I've observed, and it really is my happy place. The garden really is my happy place, and it's going to go back. It's kept me entertained. There's not a day when I finish work or a finish session with clients that I don't come out and just take 10 minutes just to walk my little patch, my little happy place, make sure everything's doing okay, and make sure there's nothing untoward. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's all about learning. So this is what I've learned. Everything I've just shared with you is what I've pretty much learned this season, and I'm hoping my next season will be far more fruitful, with lots more vegetables. It gets better. I have a curious mind. Get curious about it and look for remedies, and don't be afraid to try something new. So that's it. Those are my tips that I've learned this season, and I really wanted to share that because the one thing I was very cognizant of when I started on this journey is that there wasn't much there's lots of advice out there for gardening, but there wasn't much pertaining to the Caribbean region. So I wanted to share my experience, and I really had not much experience of growing. I've lived here a few years of growing in this region, so it's very different. Yes, there's some similarities to the US, and you can pick up some tips, but the best thing to do is learn your own seasonality, learn what works for your garden, and you will have a fabulous time. So that's it. Happy growing, and just share with me your tips and what you've learned about growing in your garden this season.